Hey CLF, so for our next episode of Easter in Real Time, we're on Thursday. It's the day of the Last Supper. And what I've tried to do with the Last Supper, since it's covered and this story is covered so much in all of the Gospels, I've tried to take portions of the Gospels and put them in some semblance of order for us so we can see how some things transpired throughout the day. And so we're going to start in John chapter 13. So if you got your Bible, you can pull out there or it'll come up on the screen for you. We're going to start in John chapter 13, and we're going to read verses 1 through 11 to start with. John chapter 13, verse 1. Now before the feast of the Passover, when Jesus knew that his hour had come to depart out of this world to the Father, having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end. During supper, when the devil had already put into the heart of Judas Iscariot, Simon's son, to betray him, Jesus, knowing that the Father had given all things into his hands and that he had come from the Father and was going back to God, rose from supper. He laid aside his outer garments and taking a towel, tied it around his waist. Then he poured water into a basin and began to wash the disciples' feet and to wipe them with the towel that was wrapped around him. He came to Simon, Peter, who said to him, "Lord, do you wash my feet?" And Jesus answered him, "What I am doing you do not understand now, but afterward you will understand." Peter said to him, "You shall never wash my feet." Jesus answered him, "If I do not wash you, you will have no share with me." Simon Peter said to him, "Lord, not my feet only, but also my hands and my head." Jesus said to him, "The one who is bathed does not need to wash except for his feet, but is completely clean. And you are clean, but not every one of you." For he knew who was to betray him. And that was why he said, "Not all of you are clean." Now skip down to verse 21 of the same chapter. After saying these things, Jesus was troubled in spirit and testified, "Truly, truly, I say to you, one of you will betray me." The disciples looked at one another, uncertain of whom he spoke. One of the disciples, whom Jesus loved, was reclining at table at Jesus' side. So Simon Peter motioned to him to ask Jesus of whom he was speaking. So that disciple, leaning back against Jesus, said to him, "Lord, who is it?" Jesus answered, "It is he to whom I will give this morsel of bread when I have dipped it." So when he had dipped the morsel, he gave it to Judas, the son of Simon Iscariot. Then after he had taken the morsel, Satan entered into him. Jesus said to him, "What you're going to do quickly." Now no one at the table knew why he said this to him. Some thought that was because Judas had the money bag. Jesus was telling him, "Buy what you need for the feast," or that he should give something to the poor. So after receiving the morsel of bread, he immediately went out, and it was night. Now let's skip over to the book of Matthew, Matthew 26, and we're going to read another section in the same kind of story that goes along with this. Matthew 26, verse 26 through 29. Now, as they were eating, Jesus took bread, and after blessing it, broke it, and gave it to the disciples. And he said, "Take, eat, this is my body." And he took a cup, that when he had given thanks, he gave it to them, saying, "Drink of it, all of you. For this is my blood of the covenant, which is poured out for many, for the forgiveness of sins. I tell you, I will not drink again of this fruit of the vine until that day when I drink it new with you in my Father's kingdom." Now let's go back to the book of John, chapter 13 again, and we're going to see a continuation of the story. We're going to look at verses 36 through 38. Simon Peter said to him, "Lord, where are you going?" And Jesus answered him, "Where I'm going, you cannot follow me, but you will follow me afterward." Peter said to him, "Lord, why can I not follow you now? I will lay down my life for you." And Jesus answered, "Will you lay down your life for me? Truly, truly, I say to you, the rooster will not crow until you have denied me 3 times. Now let's look at Luke chapter 22, verses 39 through 53. It says, "And he came out and went, as was his custom, to the Mount of Olives, and the disciples followed him. And when he came to the place, he said to them, 'Pray that you may not enter into temptation.' And he withdrew from them about a stone's throw and knelt down and prayed, saying, 'Father, if you are willing, remove this cup from me. Nevertheless, not my will, but yours be done.' And there appeared to him an angel from heaven strengthening him. And being in agony, he prayed more earnestly, and his sweat became like drops of blood falling down to the ground. And when he rose from prayer, he came to the disciples and found them sleeping for sorrow. And he said to them, why are you sleeping? Rise and pray that you may not enter into temptation." Now while he was speaking there came a crowd, and the man called Judas, one of the 12, was leading them. He drew near to Jesus to kiss him, but Jesus said to him, "Judas, would you betray the Son of Man with a kiss?" And when those who were around saw him, when those who were around him saw that what would follow, they said, "Lord, shall we strike with a sword?" And one of them struck the servant of the high priest and cut off his ear. But Jesus said, "No more of this." And he touched his ear and he healed him. Then Jesus said to the chief priests and officers of the temple and elders who had come out against him, "Have you come out as against a robber with swords and a club? When I was with you day after day in the temple, you did not lay hands on me. But this is your hour and the power of darkness." Now we're going to finish the story in the Gospel of Mark, Mark chapter 14, where we're going to find what happens now in the Garden of Gethsemane. Mark 14, starting in verse 53. "And they led Jesus to the high priest, and all the chief priests and the elders and the scribes came together, and Peter had followed him at a distance, right into the courtyard of the high priest. And he was sitting with the guards and warming himself at the fire. Now the chief priests and the whole council were seeking testimony against Jesus to put him to death, but they found none. For many bore false witness against him, but their testimony did not agree. And some stood up and bore false witness against him, saying, 'We heard him say, I will destroy this temple that is made with hands, and in 3 days I will build another, not made with hands.' Yet even about this their testimony did not agree. And the high priest stood up in the midst and asked Jesus, 'Have you no answer to make? What is it that these men testify against you?' But he remained silent and made no answer. Again, the high priest asked, 'Are you the Christ, the Son of the Blessed?' And Jesus said, 'I am. And you will see the Son of Man seated at the right hand of power and coming with the clouds of heaven.' And the high priest tore his garment and said, 'What further witnesses do we need? You have heard his blasphemy. What is your decision?' And they all condemned him as deserving death. And some began to spit on him and cover his face and to strike him, saying to him, 'Prophesy.' And the guards received him with blows. And as Peter was below in the courtyard, one of the servant girls of the high priest came, and seeing Peter warming himself, she looked at him and said, 'You were with the Nazarene Jesus.' But he denied it, saying, 'I neither know nor understand what you mean.' And he went out into the gateway, and the rooster crowed. And the servant girl saw him, and he began to say to the bystanders, 'This man is one of them.' But he denied it again. And after a little while, the bystanders again said to Peter, 'Certainly you're one of them, for you're a Galilean.' But he began to invoke a curse on himself and to swear, 'I do not know this man of whom you speak.' And immediately the rooster crowed a second time. And Peter remembered how Jesus had said to him, 'Before the rooster crows twice, you will deny me 3 times.' And he broke down and wept." The time has finally come for the Jewish leaders' plot to come to fruition. What they didn't know was that Jesus already knew that his time had come and his hour was come. And it was time for him to fulfill the will of God for his people. This day takes Jesus on quite the journey. From the Passover meal with his disciples, where he instituted what we call the Lord's Supper, to the Garden of Gethsemane to pray, and then to the tragedy of Judas Iscariot betraying him with a kiss, which is then overshadowed by another denial, Peter's. We can only imagine the grief that Peter felt in his heart for fulfilling the Lord's prophetic words. Throughout the night, this very night of Thursday, Jesus will be shuttled from one false and fake trial to another until the Jewish leaders' thirst for his death finally comes to pass. The sun will rise on Friday, and Jesus will be condemned to die by crucifixion, which is the Romans' way of executing the most vile criminals of their day. So we hope you'll join us tomorrow night at 6:30 for our live stream of the Good Friday service. Our hope is to go 1 hour, but to spend time meditating on the crucifixion of Christ.